There are many possible reasons that motivate traffickers to abduct victims, which lead to causing havoc in the country. Some examples are having more money or power. Sex trafficking in Russia is a violation of human rights because of the sexual exploitation and the life-threatening conditions that women and children have to endure. Organizations and individuals have assisted those in need, but the Russian government must pass and enforce laws nationally and locally to reduce the profitability and demand for sex trafficking. Sex trafficking started in the early 1990s and has been growing exponentially. It was created by various hardships that the people of Russia had to suffer through, including economic problems, poverty, and the creation of organized crime. The Soviet Union started creating chaos and disturbing the economy once it fell. This commotion made it easier to target kids and teenagers in orphanages. A big part of it started when wild capitalism came into play. Wild capitalism sent out ads to other countries to have better jobs. People came from all over with their flights already paid for. Once they landed, their traffickers came and took them and their belongings. This whole situation caused a hole in investments and in employment. It made women get into prostitution to earn money, but it was difficult when the males started to demand more. Behind the curtain was a shadow economy where gangs and mafia started to develop, and people were depending on the mobsters to maintain Russia's well-being. During 2016, it had more than 1 million victims of human trafficking, and the slave labor caused 5 years of forced labor. The government made sure that the public eye and the media were not aware of the trafficking. In 1992 to 2002, 500,000 children and women had been trafficked. From 2015 to 17, international organization classified 2,400 trafficking cases. The victims who encounter traffickers have the misfortune of having their life ripped away from them in a blink of an eye. The victims are becoming targets by having qualities that the traffickers find. They search for innocent people, individuals that do not involve themselves in illegal acts. They look for people who are willing, meaning they know what they're getting into with the sex industry. And lastly, invisible people, which are people like teens and children that come from many orphanages. The victims stay with the traffickers for various reasons, one being that they usually do not speak the same language, so they take their personal belongings and make them feel isolated. Second is that they are paying debts and have to stay for a longer time. Victims and the traffickers have no agreement, and debt increases when the victim is in need of something. In general, traffickers have no motive to let their victims go. Furthermore, the traffickers manipulate the victims into making them fall for them. This includes tactics to gain their trust and feeling of protection, like playing the role of a boyfriend. For the victim, it develops feelings to cope with the abuse. Moving forward, women and children perform extra jobs such as money laundering, drug, and firearms smuggling. November 28, 2018, a woman shared what her lifestyle was like living in a brothel. Nyralee can work up to 10 men every day to gain money. They are all squeezed into a tiny space while working, and there is a blanket that divides them and can hear each other. With the money they earn, it goes to the rent, the security guard, and whatever is left they can keep. It can become dangerous when groups of former clients come in and start raping and beating them, and they sometimes carry weapons, which are knives, knuckle busters, and sometimes guns. Trafficking around Russia can be very noticeable if you know where to look. The signs can appear on their body and their behavior or their living conditions. Traffickers brand their victims either with a barcode on their wrist, behind their back, or somewhere else, sometimes with a tattoo on their chest with the trafficker's name telling everyone who they belong to. In their physical health, they can appear to have poor hygiene, starvation, weak physical or sexual abuse. This corresponds with their mental health and abnormal behavior as well. They can appear fearful, anxious, depressed, paranoid, or submissive. However, their living conditions can take place at their place of work. That is usually the outcome, so the victims are not free to leave or come at their own free will and cannot have any breaks. Besides of how they live, the victims are surrounded by high security where they stay. This includes boarded up bars on the windows and barbed wire. The victims have no control over anything. That's why we need to work on providing better laws to keep the victims safe. The government does not care about sex trafficking. The laws about it are blurry. Pew has ignored the victims who have been affected and does not show empathy towards them. The reasons to not care about any of the victims is because the government has no funding for programs for rehab and does not have a national strategy. The Russian government was lacking information on prosecution efforts due to no evidence, so they remain low on the subject. An activist named Boris Patelvi states both the government and the legislation are ignoring it just to save Russia's reputation. Other than not caring, Russia was put under Tier 3, which is a group of countries that have been slacking on upholding minimum standards to defeat trafficking and are not showing efforts to fix it. Sex traffickers are willing to bribe government officials to stay out of it, to look the other way and not give them penalties for participating in illegal acts. Corruption is in the Russian government, in the state, and agencies. Russia is a hotspot when it comes to trafficking women and children, so many countries work with Russia and send women over. Europe, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and Africa are a few countries that supply Russia. Some of these women come over with student visas because they were promised a better education. Soon after, they are coerced into prostitution, having no knowledge of what's going on. Organizations and individuals have increased their desire to help and save as many victims as they can, spreading the word through websites, hotlines, and government agencies. However, more acts need to be made, such as having the government provide more shelters for the victims. Government-funded homeless shelters with medical and psychiatric aid, as well as moving victims to other homeless shelters in different parts of Russia. Orthodox Church had a helping hand accepting the men and offering them food. There is also a Russian Red Cross hotline. The OUR is a way that helps the victims and gives support without seriously hurting them. It is one of many websites that are successful in retrieving the victims and bringing them to safety. Moving on to individuals who have taken a stand against sex trafficking and Nigerian anti-trafficking activist Oremi Kahaidi. Oremi is a man who helps arrange an organization that helps African victims from human trafficking. The government, without a doubt, needs to find ways to become more useful and provide services throughout the country. A good start would be to coordinate a special help and rehabilitation center for the victims and create the process to lead law enforcers. In addition to having to go through the justice system, they need to have a fair trial, creating a national anti-trafficking plan, and having officials who agree and follow agreements that are not right. Furthermore, having an appliance formal policy which is protecting victims who are getting punished or detained because officials see them as prostitutes. Lastly, finding alternate options for victims who should avoid being deported. Sex trafficking in Russia is a dangerous act that is still progressing in today's modern society. Now knowing the information about the government, lifestyle, victim stories, the signs, and the help services, it is time to proceed in moving forward with confronting the problem head-on and going to the government to stop sex trafficking as it violates women's human rights.